We're going to start with a couple of literary quotes. I know I'm not much of a book reader, but we're going to start with a couple. So here's the first one. Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot, but the Grinch who lived just north of Whoville did not. The Grinch hated Christmas the whole Christmas season. Now please don't ask why, no one quite knows the reason. It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be perhaps that his shoes were too tight. But I think I was doing so well. But I think that the most likely reason of all may have been that his heart was 2 sizes too small. For those of you who know the Grinch, you've probably read that to children. And here's the second one. If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. I love that one. Those 2 quotes, one from the very brilliant Dr. Seuss and the other from the equally brilliant Charles Dickens, describe and place on the lips words of people who hate Christmas, the Grinch and Scrooge. And it might be you've been thinking over the last few days as you've been visiting family, you've met some of these people. I don't know. Maybe you have. But what we see in these 2 people is a certain kind of darkness. There's a darkness and a coldness to them. They have a flint-like quality at the start of the books, especially in Scrooge. When he's challenged by someone about how he lives his life and his lack of generosity towards the poor, when someone says to him that the poor would rather die than go to the workhouses, Scrooge's response is this: they'd better do it. They'd better die. And that jars us at this time of year, doesn't it? We don't like to think of those sort of things. Scrooge and the Grinch are not very Christmassy, even though the Christmas Carol story is very, very Christmassy, especially the Muppet version. These 2 characters, there's not much turkey, there's not much tinsel with them when we first meet them. But the truth is this: there is a dark side to the Christmas story, and Michael's just read it for us. Amongst all the wonder of God becoming man, and shepherds, and angel visits, and wise men, and gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and all of the carols and all of the food, there is a dark side. There's one character who doesn't appear in the traditional nativity scene, but instead he casts a very dark shadow over the events. That character is Herod. And what better way to finish a year than to look at Herod? This is going to be exciting for you this morning. And I want to start by asking a really, really provocative question. When you look at Herod in the Bible, is there anything of Herod that you see within yourself? That's the question I want you to think about this morning. Is there anything of the ultimate Grinch and the prototype Scrooge within you? As you look at Herod, is there anything of him within you? And I do realise, just as we start, how insulting that sounds, because we've just had a reading where someone murders children when he gets outwitted. So before you want to say, no, I'm nothing like Herod, let's just park that thought, just keep it as a question in our minds, and as we look at Herod, let's see if there's anything of him at all. And the way we're going to do that is, imagine you have never heard this part of the story before. You don't know where it's going. You're going to give Herod the benefit of the doubt, okay? We're going to give Herod the benefit of the doubt as we go through it. And then ask the question, as we learn various things about him, to ask, do I have any of his tendencies within me? Is there anything of him within me? So, into the reading. It's probably 2 years on from when Mary gave birth to Jesus. The small family are probably still living in Bethlehem. Jesus, by this stage, is at that walking, talking, knocking things over stage of being a child. Yet he's still living in obscurity. He's just a toddler probably going around the house. Yet 2 years ago, when he was born, something happened. Something appeared in the sky. We read of a star appearing, which some wise men see, and immediately they get the significance of what it is. 2 years later, they turn up in Jerusalem, another part of the country that Jesus lives in, and they ask a question. Where's the king? Where's the new king? We've seen his star, and we've come to worship the one who is king. That's gonna stir things up a bit. Eventually, when you go around asking questions like that, eventually people in authority take notice of you. Eventually they end up at the palace of Herod, and they ask the same question, where's the king? And Herod, along with all the influential people of the day, are thrown into massive confusion. There is no new baby. There's no new baby. There's no new king. And when it says that they're troubled, What it means is this: there's a number of things going on. They are agitated by this news. They're confused. There's a sense of fear. They don't know what's going on. It's like politically for them, something's just shaken. A new king's about. And Herod has probably been more shaken than anyone. Some guys have turned up and they're adamant that there is a new king on the scene. So, what does Herod do? First of all, he gathers together all of his religious experts. He gets them and he wants to know where. Where's this king going to be born? He knows they're expecting that God is going to send a king at some stage. So he asks them, where is he? Where is he? Where would God send his king? And the answer comes back. They look through the Old Testament. They come back to him and say, God's going to send his king and he's going to be born in Bethlehem and he is going to be an incredible ruler. They quote verses from the book of Micah, which we looked at very briefly earlier, which say, when this king comes, it's going to be like when we had our best ever king and then some. He's going to shepherd us. He's going to rule over us. He is going to be the king to end all kings. We don't hear how hearing that affects Herod on an emotional level. We just know that he hears it at that stage. So what does he do next? Herod's next step is find out when. When was this baby born? So he now secretly gets the wise men. He gets them to come and see him, and he discovers the date when this star appeared in the sky, which told them there's a new king on the scene. So now, what's he got? He's got a reference for where is this king, and when was he born? How old is he? Then he tells them, go, search, find him, and then come back, because I want to go and worship him too. That's what he says. He says, I want to go and worship him too. If you'd never heard the story before, if you didn't know that Herod was a bit of a nasty one, you could give him the benefit of the doubt. You could say he's positive, he's just a bit busy, and when he's got time, he's going to go and worship the king too. But in reality, what Herod is doing at this part of the story is what many people in our world do today. He's covering up what he really feels about Jesus. In front of everyone else, he's giving this front of, oh, I love it. I'd love to go and see Jesus. I'm just ever so busy at the minute. He is covering up his hatred for Jesus behind a fake display of respectability. We know what's going on in Herod at this point. We know what's going on in his heart. But it seems the wise men didn't. They took it on face value. They thought, Herod's too busy. We'll send word to him once we found the child, and then he can come and worship Jesus as well. Reality, Herod cannot stand the fact that he's heard a message about God's king and he's covering it up with a polite face. At this time of year, carol services are full of people. Best attendance at church throughout the year, bar none. It's the time where everyone turns up and people enjoy it. The carol services are enjoyable. People are there and they sing things like, "Oh, come, let us adore him." They sing things like, Jesus is the one who reconciles mankind and God. They sing, joy to the world, the Lord has come, let earth receive her king. But it's just words. And maybe for some of us in the room, it's just words to us. We like the songs, we like the tinsel, we like the turkey, we like the tradition of it. In the words of Tim Minchin, who's a comedian who plays the piano and sings, he has a song which reflects how many people deal with Christmas. He says this, how he's hardly religious, how he sees Jesus as a dead Palestinian. He rejects everything that Christianity is about, but then he sings, but I quite like the songs. There's many people in our world who are like that. They quite like the songs. Not interested in Jesus, but love the sentimentality of it all. Forgive me for saying this, but if that describes you, that's polite Herod. That's rejection of Jesus wrapped up in pretty packaging. And it's where many people in our world are. Polite rejection of Jesus. You quite like the songs, but you're not going to worship the king. That's part of the darkness that hangs over the Christmas story. A polite rejection of Jesus. Where does he go? Where does Herod go? He starts off politely rejecting Jesus. he ends up furiously rejecting him. So, the wise men, they go to meet Jesus. They bow down, they worship him, and they give him their presents. And I love this bit. Who gives a 2-year-old gold, frankincense, and myrrh? Who does that? Is it just me who thinks, I wonder what Jesus did with them? For me, because I've got toddlers in my house, I think they were put up on a high shelf by the end of that day. They were out of his reach. But they worship Jesus. They might not understand who he is exactly. They might not understand him in all of his fullness. They probably didn't know where his life was going, but they worshipped him. They bowed to him, and God honoured them. He told them, Herod's after the child's life. Go home a different way. And they did. And then this takes us to verse 16. The wise men, having been warned, left. Joseph, having been warned about Herod as well, flees. And in verse 16, having realised that this new king has slipped out of his grasp, he massacres boys aged 2 and under in one part of his country. His polite rejection of Jesus, when he's pushed, has become openly destructive. Who he really is, what he really thought about Jesus, came right to the surface, and that happened. This is the tragic part of the Christmas story. This is the bit that we don't like to think about. It's the bit which doesn't often get into carol services. A king massacring children. Yet it happened. Herod wanted to destroy Jesus. We're going to look at what drove him there. Herod wasn't a nice guy. Some people doubt that this bit of the Bible actually happened, but I'm pretty certain it did. If you look at what Herod was like in other historical documents, him killing some children is very much in keeping with what we know of Herod. So let's get a fleshed out version of what Herod was like. It's fair to say he was a bit of a psychopath. I think that is very fair to say. He got more paranoid as he aged. So how he got to be king, how did he get there? He used whatever political means he could use to get to the top. He did whatever he could to get there. So whoever would give him an advantage, he cozied up to them. As soon as they weren't useful to him, he cozied up to someone else. If there was anyone who stood in his way, he arranged their death. That's what he did. Whoever was in charge in Rome, Herod was their ally. To keep the people in Israel under control, he was on the one hand really, really brutal. So if there was a sniff of rebellion against him, he wiped the people out. But he was also generous, so he built temples, he built cities. He did whatever he could to keep the people sweet. He had his mother-in-law executed. I'm not going to make any jokes, even though there's so many I want to. He had one of his wives killed. 3 of his sons that he suspected of plotting against him, he had murdered. When he knew his own death was imminent, he ordered notable men from all around of his territory to be taken to Jericho on pain of death. He got them put into the hippodrome on orders that when he died, they would be executed as well, because he wanted somebody to be mourning on the day of his death. Those are just some of his deeds. So that history doesn't record outside of the Bible that he massacred some children in a small part of his country. Isn't really a surprise, because children weren't that important to people back then. This is very much in keeping with what Herod would do. He reacts furiously to Jesus and he wipes out children. So getting back to my question that I started with, are you like Herod? Are you a bit like Herod? You might want to kill your mother-in-law, I don't know. Is there anything of Herod in your character? I really get how insulting that question sounds right now, especially after that list of stuff. I imagine everyone in the room is thinking, no, I'm not a baby-killing, family-murdering nut job. And thankfully so. Thankfully none of you are like that. It would have really spoiled Christmas dinner, wouldn't it, if you were like that? But if you're going to answer that question, if you're really going to answer, are you like Herod, you have to think, why does he do what he does? Why does he do what he does? So we're right back to verses 1 and 2 of chapter 2 of Matthew. What drove Herod? Why Herod acts the way he verses. The one is the king. The wise men turn up and they are looking for a king. The difficult thing for Herod is this. He's king. They're looking for a king and he's king. Herod has done whatever it took to get where he is. He's done whatever it took to He's of whom the history books record he loved her. But the whiff of her turning against him, Jesus is not merely a baby but king. God's ruler. He knows this. If Jesus is king, Herod is not. And that means all of the power and all of the position that he's attained, he has to give them to someone else. He has to remove his crown and he has to place it on the head of Jesus. And he couldn't do it. What was most important to him, he couldn't make Jesus take its place. Now, just in the last week or so, something happened which mirrors what Herod had to do. It happened at a very prestigious event. It was the Miss Universe competition. The last two contestants got to be on the stage, Miss Colombia and Miss Philippines. There was all the usual hype, there was all the usual X Factor pausing before they announced who the winner was, and in dramatic style, after a massive, massive pause, the winner was announced, Colombia. Flashbulbs went off all over the place, the music started playing, she was crying and waving at people. Someone came on and congratulated her and hugged her. She got a sash put round her, a great big bunch of flowers. And then someone came up and put the crown on. She was having a lovely time. And for 2 minutes, she stood there, receiving an ovation from the crowd, music playing, everyone clapping, people waving at her. I didn't watch this live in case anyone is wondering. She received an ovation for over 2 minutes, and then the host comes back on the stage and says this: "I need to apologize." That's never a good thing to hear if you've just won. The first runner-up is Colombia. The winner is Miss Philippines. And then 5 minutes, a whole 5 minutes has passed where she thinks she is Miss Universe. 5 minutes later, as she stands there in front of the crowd, in front of the flashbulbs of the world and the TV audience, the flowers get taken off of her. The sash gets taken off of her. The crown gets lifted off her head and put onto the other lady's head, in full view of absolutely everyone. Why? Because in the eyes of the competition, she hadn't won. Miss Philippines had won. Miss Colombia had a humbling, humiliating moment in front of however many people watched that competition. When Herod heard that he was not king, same thing had to happen. He had to take the crown off himself and place it onto Jesus. He could do that, or he could react furiously. He chose the second option. Question is, what are you going to do? Because if Jesus is king over Herod, he's king over you, and he's king over me. And what made Herod react so furiously was not just his madness, which he obviously had. It was also that he put his entire self-worth, his entire meaning into him being king. Herod loved being king. Herod loved it. And to admit Jesus was king and to worship him was something he just could not do. He wanted to hold on to the crown, even if it meant opposing God. That's where we have to do business with God. The question, are you like Herod, is asking this: are you king of your life? Or is he? Or is something else king that's not Jesus? If you can spot something, you've got to take the crown off and put it onto Jesus. You can be like Herod a number of ways. You really can. It might be that you know what the Christian faith says about Jesus, but you don't want to let Jesus rule your life. You know it would make massive claims over what you do with your time, your money, your body, everything, but you don't want to let him take his place because you occupy that position. That's one way you can be like Herod. If that's you, you would be saying something like this: some long-gone person from history is not going to run my life. If Jesus is king, he's not a long-gone person from history. He should rule your life. But it's possible to be like Herod in other ways, even as a Christian. The tendency to be like him can slip in. Herod's problem was this: he would not worship and he would not bow to Jesus with everything he had. Yet it doesn't have to be self which does it. It can be a number of things which take Jesus' place. It can be just one other person. or the idea of having one person that's going to make your life perfect. A desire to have an intimate relationship with someone else can take the place of Jesus, so that it's so important to you that if it is in danger, if your relationship is in danger, then everything falls apart. That's one thing that can take Jesus' place. Or the dread of something happening to who you're married to or going out with or who you hope to go out with is so overwhelming that if anyone starts to mess that up, your life falls apart. Other things can take Jesus' place. Children can take Jesus' place. They have become your king if you let them walk all over you. If you let your children walk all over you, they have become your king. If you need them so much that they can do anything to you, they're your king. If your happiness is based on them being happy, they're your king. If when they're sad, you are more sad than they are, they're your king. If they're okay, you're okay, is how it works. They probably need to have the crown taken off them and placed onto Jesus. Anything can become your king. Your image before people can become king and more important to you than Jesus. If you can never say no to other people because you're worried about what they might think of you, that is more important to you than Jesus. If Ipswich losing sends you into depression for a few days, or ecstasy for that matter, so that either everyone walks on eggshells around you or knows that they can get anything out of you at that moment, that's possibly your king, and it needs to be decrowned, and Jesus needs to be crowned. Your king is what you spend your time dreaming about and giving excess time to at the expense of Jesus. At the end of a year, what might be a really good thing to do is this, is to pray, God, reveal to me those things which are your rivals. And if you feel God challenging you about this, do it. If you feel God challenging you to rest when the office calls, and it calls a lot, maybe you need to rest. If God says to you that relationship that you value so much is not actually healthy and it's not actually right for your ongoing development as a Christian, are you going to be able to say, I can put that to one side? If a daft decision by your children makes you lose all sense of perspective and it overwhelms you, are you going to place them in God's hands, or are you just going to worry and worry and worry and worry and worry? Maybe over the last few weeks, as we've done things through the Christmas story, you've been prompted to investigate Jesus or to commit to church. Are you going to do it, or are you not? Are you going to make him king, or are you not going to make him king? Why should you make Jesus king? Because Jesus is the only king who won't let you down. Anything else you make the ruler over your life, your career, your spouse, your partner, your children, your job, anything else will let you down, or it might let you down, or if you fail it, it might not forgive you. If it's big enough, if you make a mistake big enough, you might never recover with any of those other kings. Jesus will say, I'll forgive whatever you do. Your job and your workplace knows nothing of forgiveness or loyalty. If you outlive your usefulness, you're gone. That's how the workplace works. Herod couldn't bow the knee to Jesus because what was important to him was being king. What are you going to do with Jesus? Jesus came to lay his life down for you. The dark shadow of Christmas never really went away. Jesus was always going to die one day, but he wasn't going to do it on Herod's terms. He was going to do it on his own. The dark shadow of Christmas ends up at the cross. That's when darkness really falls on Jesus. That's when he says, God, where are you? That's when he says, it's finished. Question as you finish the year is this. Are there any bits of Herod within you? Are there any bits of him within you? Anything that's king that shouldn't be? Ask God to reveal them. And if he does, then do the really difficult thing. Take the crown off it and place it onto Jesus. Let's pray. Father God, we would ask this morning that you would reveal to us where we might be a little bit like Herod. So if there is something in our life which is king to us, that rules us, which whenever it snaps its fingers we go running, if there's something which, if it is threatened, our whole life falls apart. If there's anything, we ask that you would reveal it to us. And we ask that you would also give us the ability to do something else, to remove it from its place of authority and place you there, to take the crown off of it, or that person, or the job, or whatever it is, and make you king. Not to say that these things aren't important, but they have their rightful place. Father, help us to rest in you. Help us to rest in what Jesus has done. And we would ask that, as Kev started off, we would ask the question, have we got a heart for Jesus? Is Jesus our King? And if he is not, or if he's not perfectly our King, would you help us to put him in his rightful place? We ask all of this in his name. Amen.